The wind howled through the cracks of the saloon floorboards, carrying the scent of stale whiskey and desperation. In the unforgiving winter of 1887, survival in the Dakota Territory wasn't a right. It was a brutal privilege. When Clara Higgins stood on that auction block, trembling in her thin dress, the townsfolk of Oakhaven didn't see a woman. They saw merchandise. She was ready to sell her soul just to eat. But when the doors swung open and the town's most feared recluse slammed a bag of raw gold on the table, the room went dead silent. He didn't just buy her night. He bought her life. And what happened inside his isolated cabin wasn't what anyone expected. It was something far more dangerous. The town of Oakhaven was a scar on the face of the frontier. It was a place where mud turned to stone in the winter and men's hearts turned even harder. Clara Higgins walked down the main thoroughfare, her boots worn so thin she could feel every frozen rut in the earth. The biting wind whipped her auburn hair across her face, stinging her eyes, but the physical pain was a distraction she almost welcomed. It kept her mind off the gnawing hollowness in her stomach. Clara had been a widow for exactly 3 months. Her husband, Thomas, had been a dreamer. He had dragged her from the comforts of Ohio to this godforsaken territory with promises of silver veins and a sprawling ranch. Instead, he had found a collapse in shaft number 4 and a shallow grave on a hill that overlooked nothing but scrub brush. He left her with no money, no family, and a debt ledger that the town banker, Mr. Sterling, seemed to update with a predatory glee. She stopped in front of the general store. Through the frosted glass, she could see a loaf of bread sitting on the counter. It looked dry and hard, but to Clara, it might as well have been a feast fit for a king. She checked the small velvet pouch tied to her waist. Empty. She had sold her wedding ring 2 weeks ago for a bag of flour and some dried beans. Those were gone now. Pushing the door open, the bell chimed, announcing her presence. The warmth of the stove hit her instantly, making her dizzy. Mr. Henderson, the shopkeep, didn't look up from his ledger. No credit, Mrs. Higgins. You know the rules. I have work in my hands, Mr. Henderson, Clara said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to steady it. I can sew. I can scrub the floors. I can organize your stockroom. Henderson finally looked up, his eyes sliding over her with a mixture of pity and annoyance. I have a boy for the stock and a wife for the sewing. I don't need help, Clara. I need paying customers. Clara gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. I haven't eaten in 3 days. The shopkeep sighed, reaching under the counter. He pulled out a single, bruised apple and set it down. Take it and go. But don't come back begging again. It's bad for business. Clara stared at the apple. It was charity. It was pathetic. It was survival. She took it, whispered a humiliation-laced thank you, and turned to leave. But as she reached the door, it swung open, nearly hitting her in the face. Jedediah Crump filled the doorway. He was a massive man, smelling of tobacco and cheap cologne, with a belly that strained the buttons of his vest. He owned the Silver Spur Saloon, the hotel, and, effectively, the sheriff. Well now, Crump boomed, his voice like gravel in a grinder. If it isn't the widow Higgins, you lookin' a mite pale, darlin'. Clara tried to step around him, but he shifted, blocking her path. Excuse me, Mr. Crump, she murmured. I have a proposition for you, Clara, Crump said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that made her skin crawl. My girls over at the Spur are overworked. Winter brings the lonely men in droves. You're a pretty thing. Clean. Respectable. Men pay extra for respectable. Clara felt the bile rise in her throat. I am not one of your girls, Mr. Crump. No, he chuckled, looking her up and down. You're a starving widow with a debt to the bank that I just happen to know is coming due on Friday. Sterling is going to take your little shack, Clara. You'll be out in the snow. Or you can come work for me. Warm bed, hot meals, and all you have to do is be friendly. I would rather freeze. Clara spat, the flash of anger surprising even her. Crump's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. Winter is long, Mrs. Higgins, and the wolves are hungry. We'll see how high your chin is held when the frostbite takes your toes. He stepped aside, letting her pass. Clara fled into the street, clutching the bruised apple like a lifeline. She walked until she reached the edge of town, where her small, drafty cabin stood. It was freezing inside, the firewood long gone. She sat on the edge of the bed she used to share with Thomas and ate the apple in small, slow bites, trying to make it last. By the time the sun went down, the hunger was back, sharper than before. And with the darkness came the cold, a terrifying, bone-deep cold that whispered of death. Crump was right. Sterling would take the house on Friday. She would be on the street. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror on the wall. Hollow cheeks, dark circles, but the structure was still there. She was 24 years old. She had been a school teacher once. She had read poetry. Now, she was an animal calculating the cost of survival. 2 days later, on Friday morning, the sheriff pinned an eviction notice on her door. Clara didn't fight. She didn't cry. A strange numbness had taken over. She washed her face in the basin of ice water, put on her best dress, a blue wool garment that Thomas had bought her for their first anniversary, and walked back into town. She didn't go to the bank. She went to the Silver Spur Saloon. It was early evening, and the place was already filling up with miners and travelers. The piano player was hammering out a jaunty tune that clashed with the thudding of Clara's heart. She walked straight to the bar. Crump was there, wiping down a glass. He saw her and grinned, a victorious, predatory expression. "I knew you'd come to your senses, darlin'. Ready to start your shift?" Clara climbed onto a sturdy wooden crate used for speeches and announcements near the center of the room. The room quieted down, curiosity rippling through the crowd. "I am not here to work for you, Mr. Crump," Clara said, her voice ringing out clear and desperate over the noise. "I am here to make a transaction." She looked out at the sea of rough, bearded faces. "My name is Clara Higgins. I am a widow. I have no money, and I have no home. I am offering myself." The room went dead silent. The piano player stopped mid-chord. "For the price of $500, enough to clear my debts and buy passage back east, I will be a wife to the highest bidder," Clara announced. Her hands shook, but she clasped them together to hide it. "I can cook. I can sew. I can read and write. And I will honor the duties of a wife." It was madness. It was illegal, likely. But out here, the law was merely a suggestion. A murmur ran through the crowd. Men began to stand up, eyes hungry. "500? A miner shouted. "I got 50! I'll give you 100 and mule!" Another yelled, sparking laughter. Crump slammed his hand on the bar. "This is my establishment!" "If anyone is buying the lady's affections, it's me. I'll pay the 500, but she won't be a wife. She'll be the star of the Silver Spur." Clara's blood ran cold. This wasn't the plan. She hoped for a lonely rancher, a widower who needed help. Not Crump. Anyone but Crump. "Do I hear 600? Crump taunted the crowd, knowing no one had that kind of cash on hand. Going once. 700. The voice came from the back of the room, near the swinging doors. It was deep, resonant, and carried a weight that made the air in the saloon feel suddenly heavy. The crowd parted. Standing in the shadows was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the mountain itself. He was huge, standing well over 6 feet, wearing a coat made of bear fur and boots that were caked with fresh mud. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a battered Stetson and a thick, dark beard, but his eyes, piercing blue and cold as a glacier, locked onto Clara. It was Silas Blackwood, the mountain man. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Even Crump looked unsettled. Silas Blackwood was a ghost story in Oak Haven. He lived high up on the ridge, past the timberline where sensible men didn't venture. Rumors swirled about him like snowdrifts, that he had killed a man with his bare hands in Abilene, that he was a deserter from the war, that he ate raw meat and slept in a cave. He came to town only twice a year for supplies, spoke to no one, and paid in raw gold dust. Clara froze on the crate. The man was terrifying. He carried a rifle slung over his shoulder and a hunting knife strapped to his thigh that looked sharp enough to shave with. "Blackwood," Crump sneered, trying to regain his composure. "You lost? This is a civilized establishment." Silas didn't look at Crump. He walked forward, the crowd scrambling to get out of his way. The floorboards groaned under his weight. He stopped a few feet from where Clara stood. Up close, he smelled of pine resin, wood smoke, and something metallic, like blood. 700, Silas repeated. He reached into his heavy coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He tossed it onto the table near Crump. It landed with a heavy, dull thud that spoke of solid metal, not coins. Gold. Unrefined. Worth more than your paper notes. Crump eyed the bag greedily, but his pride was stinging. The lady is selling herself for marriage, Blackwood. You think a beast like you knows how to treat a wife? Silas ignored him. He looked up at Clara. His gaze was intense, stripping away her defenses. He didn't look at her body, though. He looked at her eyes. 700 to clear your debt. And you come with me. Now. Clara felt a wave of dizziness. Going with Crump meant a life of degradation, but she would be in town, near people. Going with Silas Blackwood meant disappearing into the wilderness with a man who might very well be a monster. Clara stammered. Is there a higher bid? Silas asked the room, his hand hovering near the hilt of his knife. It wasn't a threat, exactly, but the promise of violence hung thick in the air. Silence. Sold, Silas said. He didn't wait for an auctioneer. He stepped forward and extended a hand. It was large, calloused, and scarred. Clara looked at Crump, who was glaring at her, daring her to refuse. If she said no to Silas, she belonged to Crump. She took a breath, praying it wouldn't be her last, and placed her small, trembling hand into Silas's palm. His grip was surprisingly gentle, though firm. He helped her down from the crate. Let's go. I need to get my thing, Clara whispered. No things, Silas grunted. I have what you need. He pulled her toward the door. Crump shouted after them. You'll be back, Clara. When the frost gets into your bones and you realize you're sleeping next to a savage, you'll crawl back to the Silver Spur. Silas didn't flinch. He pushed through the saloon doors and into the biting night. He marched her toward a wagon hitched to 2 massive draft horses. It wasn't a carriage. It was a flatbed supply wagon loaded with sacks of grain and barrels. Get in, he commanded, gesturing to the bench seat. Clara climbed up, wrapping her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Silas climbed up beside her. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick buffalo robe, tossing it over her. Wrap up. It's a 4-hour ride. Uphill. Clara pulled the heavy fur around her chin. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. Why did you buy me? He snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward. You talk too much, he said. The journey was a nightmare. The wagon jolted over rocks and roots as they left the main road and began the ascent into the mountains. The temperature dropped with every mile. The trees grew thicker, blocking out the moonlight, turning the forest into a tunnel of shadows. Clara watched Silas from the corner of her eye. He was stoic, his eyes scanning the tree line constantly. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't speak. He just drove, with a grim determination that terrified her more than any lewd comment Crump could have made. Hours passed. Clara dozed off from sheer exhaustion, only to be jerked awake as the wagon came to a halt. We're here, Silas said. Clara looked around. They were in a small clearing nestled against a sheer cliff face. A cabin sat there, built of heavy logs, smoke curling from a stone chimney. It looked sturdy, almost fortress-like. A small barn stood nearby. Silas jumped down and came around to her side. He didn't wait for her to climb down. He reached up and lifted her by the waist, setting her on the snow-packed ground as if she weighed nothing. Inside, he pointed to the cabin. Don't wander. There are wolves. Clara stumbled toward the door, her legs numb. She pushed it open and gasped. She had expected a dirt floor, animal skins, filth. Instead, the cabin was warm. A roaring fire filled the hearth. There were actual polished wood floors, a large table, and shelves lined with books? Hundreds of books. She stepped inside, the heat wrapping around her. Silas followed, stomping the snow off his boots. He bolted the heavy oak door and dropped a thick iron bar across it. Clara backed away until she hit the table. Mr. Blackwood, I intend to keep my word. I am your wife now, in the eyes of the deal. But please, I am exhausted. Silas turned to look at her. He took off his hat, revealing a head of thick, dark hair that was surprisingly clean. He unbuttoned his heavy coat and hung it up. You think I bought you for that? He asked, his voice low. Clara blinked. I assumed. You assumed I paid $700 for a whore, he said bluntly. If I wanted that, I would have stayed at the Silver Spur. He walked over to the fire and stirred the embers. There's a room in the back, a bed, blankets. You sleep there. I sleep out here. Clara was confused. Then, why? Why bring me here? Silas turned. the firelight casting long shadows across his face. Because you're the only person in Oakhaven who can read Latin. Clara stared at him. Latin? How did you know Your husband, Silas said. Thomas. He bragged about you. Said his wife was a scholar. Said she could read the old languages. Clara felt a pang of grief at Thomas's name. Thomas is dead. I know, Silas said. He walked over to a loose floorboard near the hearth, pried it up, and pulled out a small, battered metal box. He set it on the table between them. Thomas didn't die in a mining accident, Clara, Silas said, his blue eyes hard as flint. He was murdered. And this box is the reason why. Clara's knees gave out, and she sank into a chair. What? I didn't buy a wife, Silas said, placing a hand on the box. I bought a partner. We're going to open this. We're going to translate what's inside, and then we're going to burn Jedediah Crump's empire to the ground. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Clara stared at the metal box, her heart hammering against her ribs. Murdered? She whispered, the word feeling foreign and sharp on her tongue. Thomas was crushed. The mining foreman said it was a structural failure. The foreman works for Crump, Silas said, his voice devoid of sympathy, replaced by cold, hard logic. And Crump doesn't leave loose ends, except, in this case, he couldn't find the box. Thomas hid it before he went to the shift that killed him. Silas pulled a chair out, the wood scraping loudly against the floor. He sat opposite her, his massive frame making the furniture look like a toy. Open it. Clara reached out, her fingers trembling as she undid the latch. The metal was cold. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect against the damp, was a thick, leather-bound journal and a folded piece of parchment that looked ancient. The edges were yellowed and brittle. She carefully unfolded the parchment. It was covered in intricate calligraphy, ink faded to a rusty brown. At the bottom was a wax seal, cracked but legible. It's a land grant, Clara murmured, her eyes scanning the text. From the Spanish crown, dated 1782. Read it, Silas commanded. Clara leaned closer to the oil lamp. It grants the rights of the valley, Valle de los Robles, to Don Alejandro Santiago and his heirs in perpetuity. It details the boundaries. She looked up, her eyes widening. Silas, the boundaries described here, they encompass the entire northern ridge, the creek, the mines, and the town, Silas added. Oakhaven sits right in the middle of the Val de los Robles. Clara looked back at the document. But this is just paper. The territory is American now. These old grants are often disputed. Not this one, Silas said. He tapped the journal. Thomas found this in a cave system near his claim. It belonged to the last Santiago heir, who died a hermit in these mountains 50 years ago. He had no children, but he detailed a line of succession in here. He left everything to the church, specifically a deed of trust held in Santa Fe. But the deed was lost. Clara pieced it together, her mind racing as the schoolteacher in her took over. If this document is authentic, and if the line of succession is valid, then the land Crump built his saloon on, the land the bank claims to own, none of it belongs to them. It's stolen land. Better than that, Silas said, a grim smile touching his lips beneath the beard. Look at the last entry in Thomas's handwriting. Clara flipped to the back of the journal. Thomas's familiar, messy scrawl brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them away. November 12th. I found the vein. It's not silver. It's gold. Pure, quartz-locked gold runs beneath the entire town, starting from the ridge and going down to the river. Crump suspects, I found something. I saw his men watching the cabin. If anything happens to me, Clara needs to know. The key to the claim isn't just the grant. It's the map. Gold. Clara breathed. He died for gold. He died because he wouldn't sell the location to Crump, Silas corrected. Crump knows the gold is there, but he doesn't know where the main vein surfaces. He's been buying up land, evicting widows like you, tearing up the earth trying to find it. But Thomas found the original Santiago map. It shows the entrance to the mother lode. Where is the map? Clara asked, searching the box. It's not here. Silas leaned back, crossing his arms. That's the problem. Thomas wrote the location of the map in code, in Latin. I've been staring at this page for weeks since I found the box in the rubble of the mine, but I'm a soldier, not a scholar. He pushed the journal toward her. Translated. And we find the map. We file the claim with the federal marshal in Bismarck, not the local corrupt sheriff. We prove the land isn't Crump's. We bankrupt him. Clara looked at the page. It was a riddle, written in a mix of Latin and English. Sub umbra crucis, ubi aquila dormit. Under the shadow of the cross, where the eagle sleeps, she translated softly. Silas watched her, his expression unreadable. For the first time, Clara didn't feel like a victim or a piece of merchandise. She felt necessary. It will take time, she said. The Latin is clumsy. Thomas wasn't fluent. He used a dictionary. I have to decipher his mistakes as well as the meaning. We have time, Silas said. He stood up and went to the stove. He ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls and brought them to the table, along with a chunk of cornbread. Eat, he said. You're too thin. I can't have you fainting on me. Clara took the spoon. The stew was rich with venison and potatoes. It was the first hot meal she had eaten in weeks. She ate slowly, conscious of his eyes on her. Why help me? She asked after a few minutes. You could have hired a translator in the city. You didn't need to buy me and bring me up here. Silas didn't answer immediately. He stared into the fire. Crump took something from me, too, a long time ago. He didn't elaborate, and the darkness in his tone warned her not to press. That night, Clara slept in the back room on a mattress stuffed with straw and lavender. It was soft and warm. She heard Silas pacing the main room for an hour before the cabin went silent. She lay awake, listening to the wind howl outside, realizing that for the first time since Thomas died, she wasn't afraid of the cold. She was afraid of the heat rising in the cabin, the dangerous, volatile heat of a vendetta that she was now a part of. 3 weeks passed. The winter deepened, burying the cabin in 4 feet of snow. The world outside ceased to exist, reduced to the white expanse of the mountains and the gray sky. Life in the cabin fell into a rhythm. Clara spent her days poring over the journal, cross-referencing Thomas's notes with the few geography books Silas had on his shelves. Silas spent his time maintaining the cabin, chopping wood, and hunting. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He never raised a hand to her. He never made an inappropriate advance. Each morning, he ensured the fire was built up before she woke. When he caught her shivering near the drafty window, he nailed a thick bear pelt over it within the hour. But the tension was there. It wasn't fear anymore. It was an awareness. Clara found herself watching him when he didn't know it. She watched the way his muscles hunched when he split logs, the unexpected grace with which he cleaned his rifle. He was a violent man. She knew that. But his violence was a leashed thing, disciplined and controlled. One afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds, dazzlingly bright off the snow. Put your coat on, Silas said, grabbing his rifle. Come outside. Clara followed him out. The air was crisp enough to freeze breath in the lungs. Silas walked to a tree about 50 yards away and pinned a piece of charcoal-marked wood to the trunk. He walked back and handed her a heavy revolver. It was cold and heavy, smelling of oil. If Crump comes, Silas said, I can't be your only shield. You need to know how to bite back. Clara held the gun awkwardly. I've never fired a weapon, Silas. I know. Thomas sheltered you. I won't. He moved behind her, his chest brushing against her back. The sudden proximity made Clara's breath hitch. He reached around, his large hands covering hers, adjusting her grip. Feet shoulder-width apart, he murmured, his voice rumbling against her ear. Don't lock your elbows. The recoil will hurt if you do. His hands were rough, calloused, but warm. He guided her aim. Look down the sight. Focus on the front blade, not the target. Squeeze, don't pull. Clara tried to focus, but her heart was pounding. The scent of him, wood smoke and pine, was overwhelming. Fire, he whispered. She pulled the trigger. The gun roared, kicking back violently. She stumbled, but Silas's arm was instantly there, steadying her, holding her upright against him. You missed, he said, but there was no mockery in his voice. Again, they spent an hour there. By the end, her shoulder ached and her ears rang, but she had hit the wood 3 times. Good, Silas said, taking the gun. He looked at her, and for a second, the distance between them vanished. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face. Silas reached out, almost involuntarily, and tucked it behind her ear. His fingers grazed her cheek, rough skin against soft. He froze, seemingly realizing what he was doing. He pulled his hand back as if burned. "Go inside," he said gruffly. "Get warm." He turned and marched toward the barn, leaving Clara standing in the snow, her cheek tingling where he had touched her. Later that evening, the dynamic shifted. Clara was working on the journal, frustration mounting. "I can't figure it out," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "The riddle says where the eagle sleeps, but there are a dozen peaks named after birds in this range. Eagle's Nest, Hawk's Landing, Falcon Point." Silas was cleaning his knife by the fire. Thomas wasn't a local. He wouldn't know the local names. Exactly. So he must be referring to a landmark that looks like a sleeping eagle. Suddenly, a low growl from Silas's dog, a massive wolf hybrid named Buster that usually slept by the door, broke the silence. The dog's hackles were raised. Silas was on his feet instantly, the knife disappearing into its sheath and the rifle in his hands in one fluid motion. He blew out the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness lit only by the dying fire. "Get down," he hissed. Clara dropped to the floor behind the heavy oak table. "What is it?" "Riders," Silas said. "3 of them. Heavy horses." He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutter. The silence stretched, agonizingly long. Then, a voice shouted from the darkness outside. "Blackwood! We know you're in there! It wasn't Crump. It was a younger, sharper voice. That's Dutch," Silas whispered. Crump's enforcer. "We don't want trouble! Blackwood!" Dutch yelled. "Mr. Crump just wants to renegotiate." He thinks 700 was a bit steep. He wants the girl back. Says she stole something from her house before she left. He means the box, Clara whispered. Silas didn't answer. He cracked the window open an inch. "She's not here!" he shouted back, his voice booming. "She died of the fever last week. Buried her out back. Tell Crump he wasted his money." A laugh echoed from the trees. "Now, Silas, we both know that ain't true. We saw the smoke. We saw the 2 sets of tracks. Send her out, and we leave you be." "Come and get her," Silas challenged. Gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into the log walls, splintering wood. Clara screamed, covering her head. Silas fired back, the crack of his Winchester deafening in the small space. He worked the lever with terrifying speed. Bang! Click, clack! Bang! "Stay down!" Silas roared. He moved to the other window, firing again. A scream from outside indicated he had hit someone. "Fall back!" Dutch shouted. "Burn it! Burn them out!" Clara smelled it before she saw it, the acrid scent of kerosene. A bottle smashed against the front door, an orange light flared up, flickering through the cracks. "They're burning the porch," Clara cried. "They can't burn these logs. They're too thick and wet," Silas said, though he looked worried. "But the smoke will get us." He looked at Clara. "Can you shoot?" "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. He handed her the revolver. "Watch the back door. If it opens, you shoot. Don't ask who it is. Just shoot." Silas grabbed a heavy woolen blanket and a bucket of water. "I'm going out the front. I'm going to draw their fire. You stay here." "No!" Clara grabbed his arm. "You'll be killed!" "If I stay, we both burn," Silas said. He looked at her, his blue eyes fierce. "I promise to keep you safe. I keep my promises." He unbarred the door. "Count to 3, then lock it behind me." "Silas!" 1, 2. He kicked the door open and charged into the wall of fire and snow, his rifle blazing. The cold air rushed in, feeding the flames on the porch. Clara slammed the door shut and threw the bolt, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped the gun. Outside, it sounded like a war. Shouts, the heavy boom of a shotgun, the sharp crack of rifles. She heard the whinny of horses in panic. Clara crouched by the back door, the revolver gripped in both hands. She was terrified, but beneath the terror was a cold, steely anger. Crump had taken her husband. He had taken her home. Now he wanted to take her life. Not today, she thought. A heavy thud against the back door made her jump. The handle turned. Clara raised the gun. The wood splintered as someone kicked the latch. The door flew open. A man stood there, a scarf over his face, a knife in his hand. It wasn't Silas. He lunged. Clara didn't think. She squeezed the trigger. The gun roared, flashing bright in the dark room. The man jerked backward as if yanked by a rope, clutching his chest, and fell into the snow. Clara stood frozen, the gun smoking. She had killed a man. Silence fell over the clearing. The shooting had stopped. "Silas?" she screamed. Silas! No answer. She unbolted the front door again. The fire on the porch was dying down. The snow was doing its work. She stepped out. 3 bodies lay in the snow. 2 near the trees, 1 by the back. She saw a dark shape crawling near the woodpile. Silas! She dropped the gun and ran to him. He was groaning, clutching his left side. The snow beneath him was stained black with blood. Get inside, he rasped. Are there more? I don't think so, she sobbed, grabbing his arm. Come on, you have to get up. He was heavy, dead weight, but adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she had. She dragged him into the cabin, across the floor, and propped him up against the table. She barred the door and threw more logs on the fire to build up the light. Silas was pale, his skin clammy. His coat was soaked with blood. Knife, he grunted, pointing to his belt. Cut the coat. Clara took the hunting knife and sliced through the thick bare fur and the shirt beneath. The wound was ugly. A bullet had passed through his side, just above the hip. It wasn't deep enough to hit an organ, but it had torn muscle and was bleeding sluggishly. It went through, Silas muttered, gritting his teeth. Clean through. You need to cauterize it. No, Clara said, her mind racing back to the medical book she had read. I need to stitch it. Cauterizing will cause infection with this much tissue damage. I have a sewing kit. I have whiskey. She ran to the cupboard. She grabbed the bottle of whiskey Silas kept for emergencies in her sewing box. She threaded a needle with thick silk thread. Drink, she ordered, holding the bottle to his lips. Silas took a long pull, coughing as the liquor burned down his throat. He looked at her, his eyes hazy with pain. You shot one? Yes, she said, pouring whiskey directly into the wound. Silas roared in pain, his back arching off the floor. I'm sorry, Clara wept, wiping the blood away with a clean rag. Hold still. This is the hard part. She began to stitch. Silas gripped the leg of the table so hard the wood creaked. He didn't scream again, just let out low, guttural groans with every pass of the needle. Sweat poured down his face. It took 20 minutes. When she tied off the last knot, her hands were covered in his blood. She bandaged him tightly with strips of clean linen. Silas slumped back, exhausted, his breathing shallow. Clara sat beside him, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth. You saved me, he whispered, his voice rough. We're partners, she said softly. He turned his head to look at her. The barriers were gone. The pain and the whiskey had stripped away his stoicism. I was the sheriff, he said suddenly. 5 years ago. Clara stopped wiping his brow. You? I was the law in Oakhaven. Before Crump bought the town, he wanted to bring in the gambling, the girls. I fought him. I arrested his men. Silas closed his eyes. I had a wife, Mary, and a daughter, 3 years old. Clara's hand went to her mouth. One night, my house caught fire. Silas continued, a tear leaking from the corner of his eye. They blocked the doors from the outside. I got out. I tried to get them. The roof collapsed. He took a shuddering breath. Crump told the town it was an accident, said I went mad with grief. He put his own man in as sheriff. I moved up here, waiting, watching. Clara's heart broke for him. The monster of the mountain wasn't a monster at all. He was a man hollowed out by the same evil that had killed her husband. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. It was a gesture of comfort, but as she pulled back, Silas's hand came up, catching the back of her neck. He pulled her down, not forcefully, but with a desperate need. His lips met hers. It tasted of whiskey and blood smoke, but it was electric. Clara didn't pull away. She melted into him, her hands tangling in his dark hair. It was a kiss of survival, of shared pain, of two broken souls finding the matching jagged edges in the other. He pulled back, wincing as the movement pulled his stitches. Clara, he breathed. Rest, she whispered, stroking his cheek. We're safe for tonight. No, Silas said, his eyes hardening again. He sent Dutch. That means he knows we're a threat. He won't stop. He looked at the journal on the table. Did you figure out the riddle? Clara looked at the book. The adrenaline had cleared the fog in her mind, where the eagle sleeps. It's not a mountain, she said, realization dawning on her. It's the church. Silas frowned. The church! The old Spanish mission ruins at the edge of the valley, Clara explained rapidly. The bell tower. It has a brass weather vane. It's not a cross. It's an eagle. The Spanish crest. The map is in the mission? Thomas wrote Sub Umbra Cruces, under the shadow of the cross. But if the weather vane is an eagle, at sunset, the shadow of the eagle would fall on a specific spot in the graveyard. Silas struggled to sit up. The mission is 2 miles from town. If Crump figures it out... He won't, Clara said. He doesn't have the journal. But we have to go there. We have to get the map before he realizes Dutch isn't coming back. I can't ride, Silas said, looking at his side. I can barely sit. Then we take the wagon, Clara said, her voice firm. I'll drive. We leave at dawn. Silas looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. Clara, if we go down there, we are walking into a slaughter. No, Clara said, reaching for the revolver and reloading it. We're walking into a revolution. We're going to take back our town, Silas. For Thomas. For Mary. For your daughter. Silas nodded slowly. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it. For us. The descent from the mountain was a grueling test of endurance. The wagon, laden with nothing but hope and 2 desperate souls, creaked and groaned over the frozen ruts of the trail. Clara gripped the reins, her knuckles white inside her thin gloves. Beside her, Silas drifted in and out of consciousness. The fever had set in, his skin burning hot despite the biting wind. Every jolt of the wagon drew a sharp hiss of pain from his lips, but he refused to lie down in the back. He sat upright, the Winchester rifle resting across his lap, his eyes scanning the tree line with glazed determination. Dawn broke over the valley in a wash of pale gray and bruised purple. Oakhaven lay below them, smoke rising from its chimneys, oblivious to the violence that had occurred on the ridge or the reckoning that was coming. Clara steered the horses away from the main road, guiding them toward the eastern edge of the valley where the ruins of the San Gabriel mission stood. The mission was a skeletal remains of the past. The adobe walls were crumbling, returning to the earth from which they were made. The roof of the main sanctuary had collapsed decades ago, leaving the interior open to the sky. But the bell tower still stood, a stubborn finger pointing toward heaven, capped by the dull, tarnished brass weather vane. Clara pulled the wagon to a halt behind a thicket of scrub oak, hiding it from the road. She turned to Silas. We're here. Silas blinked, fighting the fog in his mind. He looked up at the tower. The eagle, he rasped. Sure enough, the weather vane wasn't a rooster or a cross. It was a stylistic eagle, wings spread, facing into the north wind. Help me down, Silas grunted. Clara jumped down and moved to his side. She braced her shoulder under his arm, taking his weight. He was heavy, a mountain of a man reduced to trembling weakness, and the guilt pierced her heart. He had taken this bullet for her. They hobbled into the graveyard surrounding the mission. The tombstones were weathered, many of the names erased by time. Snow drifted against the stone markers. The journal said Sub Umbra Cruces, Clara whispered, looking at the position of the sun. It was low in the east. If the eagle is the cross, we have to wait for the shadow to hit the right spot. But the sun is in the wrong place. We need the afternoon sun. No, Silas said, leaning heavily against a headstone. Thomas wrote dormant, sleeps. The eagle sleeps in the west. The sun rises in the east, casting the shadow west. We're in the right time. He pointed a shaking hand. As the sun crested the distant peaks, the long, distorted shadow of the bell tower stretched across the graveyard. The shadow of the eagle's wings fell precisely over a humble, flat stone marker near the back wall. There, Silas said. Clara ran to the grave. She brushed the snow away. The stone was blank, save for a crude carving of a pickaxe. It wasn't an ancient grave. It was a marker Thomas had placed. The shovel, she called out. She ran back to the wagon, grabbed the spade, and returned. She began to dig. The ground was frozen hard, resisting every strike. Sparks flew as the metal hit the ice-packed earth. Clara dug with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, panting, sweat slicking her back despite the cold. Silas sat on a nearby tombstone, the rifle propped on his knee, watching the perimeter. Faster, he whispered, his voice weak. We're exposed, 2 feet down, 3 feet. The shovel hit something hollow. Clara dropped to her knees. She clawed at the dirt with her hands, pulling out a metal canister, similar to the one Silas had under his floorboards, but smaller. It was an old blasting powder tin. "I found it!" she cried, holding it up. She pried the lid off. Inside lay a roll of canvas. She unfurled it. It was a map, detailed and precise, drawn over the original Spanish survey. Red ink marked a spot near the river bend, the entrance to the mother lode. And attached to it was a handwritten confession signed by the former mine foreman, detailing Crump's orders to sabotage the supports in shaft number 4. "It's everything," Clara sobbed, relief washing over her. The map. The proof of murder. "We have him." Clara stood up, clutching the tin to her chest. She turned to show Silas, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. But Silas wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the entrance of the graveyard. "Drop it, Mrs. Higgins." The voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifying. Jedediah Crump stepped out from behind the crumbling adobe wall. He was dressed in a fine fur coat, holding a pearl-handled revolver. Behind him stood 4 men, rifles raised. Silas tried to lift his Winchester, but his strength failed him. The barrel wavered, dipping toward the ground. One of Crump's men fired a warning shot that kicked up snow inches from Silas's boot. "Don't be a hero, Blackwood," Crump sneered. "You look like you're about to fall over anyway." Crump walked forward, his eyes fixed on the tin in Clara's hands. "I must admit, I underestimated you, Clara. I thought you were just a desperate little thing. But look at you, deciphering dead languages, digging up graves. You're quite the treasure hunter." "You killed my husband," Clara said, her voice shaking with rage. "And you tried to kill us." "Business involves risk," Crump shrugged. "Thomas was stubborn. He wouldn't sell. And you became an inconvenience when you ran off with my property." He gestured to Silas. "Although, seeing the state of him, I doubt you got your money's worth." "Let them go," Silas growled, trying to stand, pain etching deep lines into his face. "The fight is between you and me, Crump." "Oh, Silas." Crump laughed darkly. "The fight ended 5 years ago when I burned your house down. You're just a ghost that forgot to die." He turned his gaze back to Clara. "Give me the map, Clara, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you live. You can come back to the saloon. I have a spot open." Clara looked at Silas. He was barely holding on, surrounded by gunmen. If she gave up the map, Crump would kill them both. He couldn't leave witnesses. She looked at the bell tower above them. The rope for the bell had long since rotted away, but the heavy bronze bell still hung there, suspended by rusted chains. "Come here and take it," Clara said, her voice turning cold. She backed up until her back pressed against the tower wall. Crump grinned. "Have it your way." He holstered his gun and stepped forward, eager to take the prize himself. "Keep guns on the mountain man," he ordered his men. Crump stepped over the grave, reaching for the tin. "Smart girl." Clara looked him in the eye. "I'm not a girl. I'm a widow." She didn't hand him the tin. Instead, she grabbed the rusted iron lever mounted on the wall, the emergency release for the bell mechanism, and yanked it with all her weight. A screech of tearing metal echoed through the ruins. The rusted chain above snapped. The massive bronze bell, weighing hundreds of pounds, plummeted straight down. "Move!" Silas roared, forcing his body into motion. Crump looked up, his eyes widening in horror, but he was too slow. The bell smashed into the stone floor of the portico, inches from where he stood. The impact was cataclysmic. It didn't hit him directly, but the force of the collision shattered the ancient stone flagstones, sending shrapnel and a shock wave outward. The floor beneath Crump gave way, the old crypt ceiling collapsing under the sudden weight. Crump screamed as he fell into the darkness of the basement, followed by the massive bell. The explosion of dust and noise stunned Crump's men. For a split second, they wavered. Their attention snapped toward their boss. That second was all Silas needed. Pain vanished, replaced by the cold, mechanical precision of a soldier. He raised the Winchester. Crack. The man closest to Clara dropped. Click, clack, crack. The second man spun around, clutching his shoulder. The remaining 2 scrambled for cover behind the tombstones, returning fire. Bullets chipped the stone angel Clara was crouching behind. "Stay down!" Silas yelled, diving behind a large granite obelisk. "Silas!" Clara screamed, clutching the map tin. Crump is down there! He fell into the crypt! Keep your head down! The graveyard became a kill box. Bullets whined through the air, ricocheting off the frozen ground. Silas was breathing hard, blood seeping through his bandages again. He had 3 rounds left in the tube. "Blackwood!" one of the hired guns shouted. "You're a dead man! We got you pinned!" Silas looked at Clara across the gap between the tombstones. She was terrified, covered in dirt, clutching the evidence that could save them. But they wouldn't live to use it if they didn't end this now. He caught her eye. He pointed to the wagon, then to the left flank. He had 3 fingers, 3 shots. Clara understood. He was going to draw their fire. She needed to get to the shotgun under the wagon seat. Silas took a deep breath. He broke cover, standing tall. He fired twice in rapid succession, suppressing the gunmen, forcing them to duck. "Go!" he roared. Clara sprinted. She ran through the snow, her dress tangling in her legs. A bullet zipped past her ear, snapping a twig on a bush. She reached the wagon and scrambled up. Her hands found the double-barreled coach gun Silas kept beneath the blanket. She turned. One of the gunmen had broken cover, flanking Silas. He had a clear shot at the mountain man's exposed back. Clara didn't hesitate. She leveled the heavy shotgun. The recoil was going to bruise her, but she didn't care. Boom! The buckshot tore through the brush, catching the gunman in the leg. He went down, screaming. The last gunman, seeing his companions down and Crump gone, threw his rifle into the snow. "I quit! Don't shoot! I quit!" Silence descended on the mission, heavy and ringing. Silas stayed behind the tombstone for a moment, waiting. When he was sure it was over, he slid down to the ground, the rifle slipping from his fingers. Clara dropped the shotgun and ran to him. "Silas!" He was pale, his eyes closing. Did we win? "We won," Clara wept, pressing her hands over his wound to stop the bleeding. "We won, Silas!" A low groan came from the hole in the portico floor. Clara stood up, her face hardening. She walked over to the edge of the collapsed crypt. 10 feet down, in the gloom, Jedediah Crump lay pinned beneath a pile of rubble in the edge of the massive bell. His legs were crushed. He was coughing blood. He looked up, seeing Clara's silhouette framed against the sky. "Help me," he wheezed. "I'll give you anything. Money, gold." Clara looked down at the man who had tormented her town, killed her husband, and destroyed Silas's life. She held the tin canister over the hole. "You have nothing I want, Mr. Crump," she said. "This map goes to the U.S. Marshal in Bismarck, along with your foreman's confession." "Clara, please, my name," she said, her voice echoing in the stone chamber, "is Mrs. Blackwood." She turned and walked away, leaving him to the darkness and the cold. The spring thaw arrived late that year, but when it came, it turned the Val de los Roblos into a riot of wildflowers. The town of Oakhaven was transformed. The arrival of the U.S. Marshals 3 days after the shootout at the mission had been swift and decisive. With the map and the confession, the bank's claim on the land was nullified. Sterling was arrested for fraud. Crump died of his injuries in the crypt before help could arrive. A fitting end, the town whispered, for a man with a heart of stone. Clara stood on the porch of the cabin. It looked different now. Curtains hung in the windows. A rocking chair sat on the wooden planks. The bearskins were still there, but the air smelled of baking bread and fresh coffee. She watched the figure walking up the path from the barn. Silas moved with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of that winter. But he was strong. The darkness that had shrouded him for 5 years was gone, replaced by a quiet peace. He carried a basket of fresh eggs. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her. "Marshall sent a rider," Silas said, climbing the steps. "The patent office approved the claim. The mine is ours. Or, rather, yours." "Ours," Clara corrected him. She took the basket from him and set it on the railing. "Everything is ours." Silas reached out, his hand cupping her face. He was still a man of few words, but he didn't need them anymore. He pulled her close, kissing her softly. "The town council wants to know if I'll take the sheriff's star back," he murmured against her hair. "What did you tell them?" Clara asked, leaning into his warmth. "I told them I'm busy," Silas said, a rare smile touching his eyes. "I have a mind to run, and a wife to keep out of trouble." Clara laughed, a sound that rang clear and happy through the mountain air. "I think you're the one who needs keeping out of trouble, Mr. Blackwood." "Likely," he agreed. He picked her up, ignoring her protest, and carried her across the threshold into the warmth of the cabin. They had survived the winter. They had survived the wolves. And in the heart of the wild, unforgiving West, they had found something more precious than the gold in the ground. They had found a home. Clara Higgins started as a woman with nothing. No food, no husband, and no future. She was ready to sell her body just to survive the winter. But fate had other plans. When Silas Blackwood slammed that gold on the table, he didn't just save her from a life of shame. He ignited a chain of events that would topple a tyrant and heal two broken hearts. From the frozen isolation of the mountain cabin to the deadly shootout in the mission graveyard, Clara and Silas proved that survival isn't just about breathing. It's about fighting for what's yours. They found justice in the shadows and love in the snow. What about you? If you were standing on that auction block, freezing and starving, would you have the courage to trust the monster of the mountain? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of survival, betrayal, and romance in the Wild West, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and subscribe so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching.